Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Clallam EDC Coffee Chat this morning. We're really happy to have on some of the owners of the Blackball Ferry Lines, and also we are going to be having both Representative Chapman and Representative Tharinger on with us this morning in just a bit. They're at another meeting in Grays Harbor, I believe, and so on a Zoom meeting there. So as soon as that wraps up, they'll be joining us. But we also have, I've seen at least two of our county commissioners, maybe three on, and I wanted to give them an opportunity and the owners of Blackball to talk about the border closure and how the American Rescue Plan Act is going to serve as a solution for a really incredibly important company for our county that has a direct up to 130 jobs, I believe, and then but there's over 1,000 jobs or around 1,000 jobs that are directly reliant upon the services that Blackball Ferries provide to our county, and also Jefferson County and Grays Harbor and Kitsap County. So would one of the county commissioners like to start, and then we can let one of the Ryans or one of the Blackball owners take it.
Thank you, Colleen. Excuse me, trying to get my computer oriented here. First, let me thank not only you, but the entire staff. I mean, the governor's staff, certainly the Steve and Mike and Kevin all working together, recognizing that the Blackball needed some help, and certainly Congressman Kilmer was at the same time. From the very first call I think we had when the pandemic began, I raised that as an issue, as a major entity that is going to need some support to get through. Little did I know, and I think when one of the Ryans comes on later, that we're going to have a complete shutdown with the Canadian border as long as we did, and we didn't know that. And I think everyone come together, certainly also you, Colleen, from the EDC. I mean, we've been knocking on every door that we can think of, coming about it in any different way possible. And obviously the Rescue Act is certainly putting money in place to hopefully get us over the hurdle that we have. But, you know, I think I'll let one of the Ryans talk about kind of where they are and what they're seeing, because it's a difficult thing. Can you imagine having a business that had no sales revenue for how long now? Well over, not a single dollar coming in, right? Really. So, and to survive through that is difficult, and is I would say, as fiscally conservative as Blackball has been, I know, having run businesses myself, to go for that long with no revenue whatsoever and still be in business is just amazing in itself. So, you know, I'll start with that. And the B part, you know, it was apropos that the folks from Blackball did the study that showed not only do you have about 100 direct jobs related to Blackball, but you've got over 1,000 jobs throughout our community related to the tourism businesses. You have 500,000 people approximately going back and forth. And again, for our community long-term, I just consider, like I think so many of the rest of us, and I have always felt that way with my fellow commissioners, that this is just a key economic engine for our community. And so again, I thank everyone for working with us. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting a lot closer. So that's probably about all I'm going to say right now, Colleen.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add too that this is a company that's unique for us. When I've been looking through what are the large employers for our county, it takes till you get to about 30 companies or employers that are locally owned tax-paying companies. The others are all either government, nonprofit, tribally owned, or the Walmart, Costco, Home Depots of the world. So large retailers that are not locally owned. So they're the first one that is locally owned, and they're employee owned, and they have really high wages. I'll let them speak to that, but they've been a driver for our economy that we have to protect. And I think it's a great quality of life service, but it also is, as Commissioner Johnson said, a huge driver of our economy. And, oh, by the way, a port tenant. So Ryan, do you want to, and that's open to any of them?
Sure, I'm hoping I can screen share with you here. So let me see if I can get my, you have to enable that for me, I think.
I did.
Okay, let me try it again. Okay.
And I do see that while you're doing that, Representative Tharinger and Chapman have joined us.
Hello, everybody.
And good morning.
And thank you for joining.
I will just quickly run, well, it's getting away from me here. I'll quickly run through some slides this morning just to kind of tell you where we are. And I'll start kind of with the bad news and then hopefully move to some better news. So Blackball has been out of service, as most of you know, since March 29th. This is the longest service outage in the history of this route, which has been in operation generally by Blackball for well over 100 years through different iterations. During this period, nearly all of our employees had been laid off or furloughed, although we did have PPP in 2 rounds, and we're in a current round of that, which has been a great help. And that has been, supported from CARES. We also received support via CARES through the county, and the city has helped us with some utility relief. There's just lots of support that we've received from the community, and we're very appreciative of that. It's kind of to the point you guys were mentioning earlier. We've lost at least 500,000 visitors so far. And of course, we don't know when we're going back into service. I'll talk a little bit more about that and what that number could look like. Our charter bus service is suspended at least until this summer. There's lots of hotel room nights that have gone empty, and Nathan West had spoken to the lodging tax challenges of the city recently. That is, I'm sure, related to lack of ferry traffic. We talked about the jobs, and state and local taxes from our visitors is pretty substantial. So the economic impact, I'm just going to touch on it quickly. This is a $64 million direct spending number. That's per year. So now we're over a year. And so this number gets larger if we're out longer. And I won't belabor this because I think most of you have probably seen these numbers. Probably most importantly is the Canadian viewpoint. And right now, the majority of Canadians polled don't want to reopen the border to the US until there's herd immunity. Bonnie Henry, who is the provincial health officer, as well as some of the federal officials, have said it appears like September would be the earliest that they would consider reopening the border. So just imagine that. Canada is also on a very different path with vaccines. The population is getting registered mostly right now for their first dose, and then there's a 4-month window to the second dose. And that's not everywhere, but it's pretty much nationwide at this point. So there's a considerable lag between when the first doses are administered and when full vaccination occurs. So they're very far behind where the US is in terms of vaccine rollouts. These are some of the quotes that have been attributed to provincial and federal legislators in the Canadian side. They've actually banned travel between even health regions within the province. So imagine not being able to go from, say, Vancouver Island to Vancouver until the end of May, May 25th or something like that. They're not using testing in the same way. They're not looking at when travel will resume based on testing. They have said there will be no international travel for some time, perhaps fall at the earliest, but even that is not a given. And that is a quote from several officials. They're talking about reopening domestic travel in the late summer or midsummer. And BC residents are going to, continue to see the same tight restrictions that they have for some time. This is just something that I wanted to bring up to show people kind of where I've got a few slides here. Most people in the community are waiting for people to be fully vaccinated or want to make sure that the visitors are fully vaccinated before they allow visitors again. So this goes both ways. This is not just travel into Canada, but also from Canada. And this is an interesting one. It actually, as dire as it looks, the third little bar is about the United States. And it shows you that while there's still only 13% of people comfortable with visitors from the United States, that number has gone up from 3% to 13%. So it's actually kind of a positive move forward for us. And we hope that as people are vaccinated, things will change. To give you an idea, we've actually had pretty good numbers in Clallam County for our tourism economy overall. And thankfully our regional travelers have supported our economy and our locals have supported our economy. But this gives you an idea of what's happened in Victoria. They're down remarkably. They have had an absolute disaster of a season for all of the tourism operators in Victoria, and that $64 million impact that we have here on the peninsula, it's about double that in Victoria. So they have lost somewhere over 100,000 jobs in tourism alone. So you can see this is pretty dire for Victoria. So it's not that they're not taking it seriously, it's rather that they're working very hard to bend the curve and try and get back. What have we done while we've been out of work? We run the ship about every 6 weeks. We had a very successful shipyard period where we did our mandatory Coast Guard inspections and improvements and things that we have to do to keep the ship going. The crew is working exceptionally hard to maintain the ship and do the things that you need to do to keep an older vessel in tip-top condition. So when we do return to service, you will see the pride our crew has in this ship. It's exceptional. I want to make sure I thank everybody that we've received support from, and I'm missing even a few, and I didn't put the governor's office in there and several others. Our senators and representatives at the federal level, our state delegation, the county commissioners, the port, EDC, the city. There's just so many people who have come to really express their support for Blackball. We can't be more thankful. And we know we're going to make it through this. We've got lots of potential things, and Commissioner Johnson mentioned, a couple of things. We're hoping that some things come through on multiple levels, legislatively and otherwise. And we are also very thankful for our crew and their dedication and commitment, because they've stuck with us for this whole period of time. What do we look at? Well, we're anxious to start. We want to get back to work. People want to travel again. I can't tell you how many people have said things like, I moved to Clallam County because I wanted to be close to Victoria, or our undersheriff, saying my family is across, and in Canada, we want to get back to visiting. I think there's great pent-up demand. I think we have to be realistic with what the politicians and health officers are saying in Canada, and that's that it's not likely this summer. I would also hold some optimism that maybe vaccine rollouts could be more quick than they have been, but I wouldn't hold my breath either. And I'm hoping that we'll be back in service towards the end of the year. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, or maybe any of the other commenters would care to add something.
This is Michael McQuay, Ryan. Thank you so much. And thank you to the owners of the Blackball and our commissioners and some of our legislators that have really helped this quandrum regarding the Blackball. And our hearts go out to you guys. One quick question, Ryan, and I know it's probably a little bit soon, and you might even know that not even know yet that we're moving forward with the Crab Festival this year, and we think it's going to be pretty successful. And I'm just wondering what your timeline is to get involved with that, if you think you're going to be open by October.
I've been in conversations with Scott at the Crab Festival, and we've talked about what the possibilities are. I think it is very dependent on the Canadian side, and you know, even what has been discussed after full vaccination, there's still a lot of hesitancy. So could we be operating? It's possible. Could we be operating at full capacity? I think is probably less likely. But you know, that's unfortunately that's conjecture. You know, at this point, we don't know. So I would love to see Crab Fest go off with you know, thousands of Canadians coming back again and really have it be a fantastic event this year. I certainly can't commit to that, and I don't know if Ryan Burles or one of the others has an opinion on it, but I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a full Crab Fest this year by October.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. So Michael is our board chair, so appropriate that he gets to ask the first question. If anybody has any questions for Blackball, Kai, I know you said you have a question. Let's start with that, and then we can open it up to our legislators a bit. But I think that now that they're on, I think you missed that huge round of thanks to you both for getting some funding to help out an incredibly important business for our county. Kai, did you have a question for concerning Blackball or another topic?
Concerning Blackball, thank you. To what extent can you comment on Blackball's financial staying power, and what are the hopes for federal or state aid to help to keep you afloat financially? And what can this community do? For example, can we buy tickets in advance for trips next year to the extent that you may need cash flow this year? And I also understand that the actual run-up to restarting operations will require most likely a fair amount of cash, rehiring employees and so forth before the revenues start rolling in. What are your requirements, and where is help coming from, and what else can we do to help?
I guess I'll try and field that question. We very thankfully had what I have referred to in the past as our rainy day fund, and that was money that we had intended to invest in other parts of the business. And we have, as you saw earlier, we furloughed most of our employees, and we've been able to survive quite a bit of this period with that, plus the assistance from the CARES Act through the county that allowed us to continue paying health care for our employees, that kind of thing. We have maximized all the benefits of the federal programs that we've seen, and there is very strong potential for some of the legislative action to assist Blackball, and that remains to be seen. Kind of has to come through, you know, federal, state, local, and other authorities. So we're optimistic in that regard. I will address the question that I get quite frequently, and that's, you know, can we do dinner cruises? Can we do those kinds of things? Can we, you know, do other, as you're mentioning, advanced ticket sales? That's something that we've talked about. Generally, I want to make people aware that it isn't an easy undertaking to activate a ship and operate under our international requirements and crewing. It's not inexpensive to do that, and the potential return would probably be a lot smaller than people might expect, if any, in doing kind of events for fundraising, that kind of thing. We have been looking at it. We have looked at different ideas, but at this point, we're not actively engaging on any of those. Saying that, we're still open to ideas. And your Kai, your suggestion is one that we have been looking at, but we also need to be fully aware that we don't know when we can return to service. So we don't want to sell someone a ticket for the future on a date that we don't know we can actually provide them service for.
Okay, thank you. So if Commissioner Ozias, would you like to add anything? Or if not, we'll move on to our representatives that have joined us.
No, I don't really have anything to add except for to tell Ryan that the pride that your crew takes in that ship is always evident and always has been. And that's one of the greatest joys of traveling on it. And I can't wait to do it again. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Can I jump in with a question for Ryan before we jump?
Sure. Go ahead.
Cool. Hey, neighbor. So I got a question for you regarding the Canadian perspectives. I thought those were some really nice slides. And all of these conversations about the border being closed are happening at a very high level. I haven't heard of any efforts by like people from Port Angeles or say people from Victoria that, I don't know, do something like, hey neighbor, we miss you. Is there any effort? Do you think there's any, do you think it's worth putting an effort into trying to put like a ground effort to be like, we miss Canada. Maybe we have a costume contest dressing up like our favorite Canadians. Does that strike you as something worth doing just to like, you know, like America's a big country, right? And like the last couple of years have been intense, but we're just a small little community, Port Angeles. Does that strike you as worthwhile efforts or should I like kind of shut down this idea?
I like anything that positive, and I appreciate the enthusiasm. I think all of us at Blackball appreciate that. I think largely just that, as silly as that slide may have looked and showing the sentiment changing, I think, you know, our friends in Victoria are equally as frustrated with the border being shut down. And, you know, I think they're starting to appreciate that the U.S. is tackling the COVID issues and doing so in a remarkably quick way. So sentiment is changing. And I know a lot of people on the island, my dear friends who desperately want to cross the border. So, you know, I think it's a good idea. I don't know what the execution of that is, but you know, it's a great thought for sure.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Thank you. So Representative Tharinger and Representative Chapman, thank you so much for joining us. And you guys want to say a few words and then we'll open it up to questions. I know I have a bunch because you guys were really busy and got a lot of things passed, big items passed in this last legislative session.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. Good morning, everybody. How much got done in this two-dimensional world of flat screens? Some people say it was because the lobbyists couldn't get to us as much, so that the process was a little more expedited than getting buttonholed in the hallway in the legislative building. But as far as budgets and policy, I mean, it's a historic session, quite frankly. The capital budget, which you know I chair and have a fair amount to say in that process. You know, we started out and we had a robust budget, and then Joe Biden stepped in and we picked up an additional, you know, $600 million, which was pretty exciting. And we were able to use those dollars in the House anyway, working with my Republican ranking member, Mike Steele from Chelan. We put about 122 million of that into sewer and water infrastructure, because one of the words in the government, in the federal direction on that spending was for water, and that's pretty broad. So we looked at, you know, sewer and water projects. One on the North Peninsula that's probably important is the Port Hadlock sewer. They've been struggling to get that done for a long time. It was kind of comparable to what we tried to do in Carlsberg years back when Mike and I were commissioners. but we were able to give them some dollars, I think $15 million to help them move that project forward, which will help a lot for that UGA. And so that then freed up dollars for other things in different projects across the North Peninsula. We were able to get some money for the Emergency Operations Center and come back to, they'll probably be, I suspect Randy will be coming back for a little more money next cycle. But, you know, there's just so much in this budget. It'd probably be better to have people just, you know, ask questions about specifics. I will say on the Blackball, the partnership between the state and the county is important. And I noticed Ron Allen's on the call. Ron was very influential in that process, speaking to the governor and speaking to different senators, and his view on those issues, I think, was very persuasive. So thank you, Ron, for that participation. You're, as we all know, very effective and very much a great voice for us on the North Peninsula. You know, these budgets were really robust, both operating and capital. So some folks are concerned where we are, you know, as far as reserves. And I will say we have a historical reserve in the capital budget of about 80 or 90 million that will be used in the supplemental next year. And in the operating budget, the way the formulas work, the budget stabilization account will be back to about $2 billion when we come back in 2 years to do the, you know, to rewrite a biennial budget. Plus there's about $1 billion in reserve at the bottom balance. And then there's also, I think, $1 billion in the federal stimulus money that is available for, you know, discretionary spending as crises arise during the next, you know, couple of years. So even though these are robust, they also have balances that are, I think, very, very prudent and very substantial to help us manage the expenditures. We've worked, as you know, the last couple of years to try to align the capital budget's investments and the operating budget's investments, and that's behavioral health is a big spot, right? So we've got hundreds of millions of dollars in community behavioral health to keep folks help folks get their treatment in the community. We've aligned investments in dental clinics, and they've made an increase in dental expenditures in the operating budget. So there's just that, and then the affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, we're making huge investments in those areas. And we're also then providing the operating budget, the staffing for that. But there's a huge need for behavioral health staffing. So one of the things we're investing in is a teaching hospital up in Northgate with the University of Washington. And that'll be, I think that's one of the first in the country, actually, that's a behavioral health teaching hospital. And that'll create the workforce that we need to fund, to provide the trained therapists and behavioral health experts in both the community setting and in the larger institutional setting. There's broadband has been a huge issue. There's almost $500 million in broadband, most of it going to the broadband office. And then also money into public works and curb for broadband. And as folks probably have been tracking, there were two pieces of legislation to open up the participation of ports and PUDs in the broadband space so that we can add a little competition and hopefully get better coverage to be able to fill those, those broadband deserts. There's a lot of debate in the broadband policy world between unserved, whereas people don't have any connection, and underserved. And I think a lot of us feel that the underserved needs a little more competition. And so that's defined by the number of megabytes, up and down, 100 megabytes in, and I think it's 25 or 30 megabytes up. So trying to, again, get money into this sector to provide competition to get more coverage for folks so that, as we all know, the virus has highlighted that need, whether it be for healthcare, education, or just economic activity. And, we're not going to see any of these changes, in the next 2 months. I mean, this is a lot of money to move out the door, but I would say by the end of the year and certainly by the first quarter of next year, we will see the real value in these investments. And I guess I would just leave it at that and open for questions. Of course, Mike has some, I'm sure, some input on this.
Yeah, Mike, can you take it for a bit and then we'll open it up to questions.
I think the last couple of times I've been on by myself. It's actually really nice to have Representative Tharinger because he covers everything. So we have I have 5 screens of folks that have signed into this call. So I definitely want to take questions as quick as possible. I guess, if nothing else, chairing the Rural Development, Ag and Natural Resource Committee, I think obviously the large piece of legislation that moved through my committee was the Wildland and Forest, in essence, kind of a fire prevention and forest management bill that had a pretty steep price tag on it. And initially we were thinking we were gonna have to raise some sort of new tax to pay for it, but for this biennium, the general fund was able to absorb that. So I think that that's going to definitely, we don't have quite the wildfire issues on the peninsula that they do in Eastern Washington. But one of the things we know is we've got to continue to manage our forests for forest health down the road. And there's a lot of conversation about the impact, the role that healthy forests play in carbon sequestration, combating climate change. But at the end of the day, wildfires are our #2 greenhouse gas emitter in our state. So we can do all the policies we want, but if our forests burn, we just take a giant step backward if you're concerned about climate change and CO2 being released into the atmosphere. So this bill should actually help stabilize our forests. Thanks to Kevin, we got some language in that DNR is still going to need to, through their sustainable harvest calculation, they're still going to have to report back to the legislature on a regular basis. So we make sure that their sustainable harvest calculation, their metrics are met. And Senator Vandaway did a great job in his committee putting that language into that bill before it passed. It was a bipartisan bill, and because it didn't have a new tax increase, I believe it was unanimous, both the House and the Senate. My committee traditionally passes more bipartisan pieces of legislation than any committee, and I'm glad to report that as chair, that tradition continued. And I believe virtually, I think every bill that came out of committee that we voted off the House floor, I don't remember a partisan bill, I think, and so most of them were virtually unanimous, if not unanimous. So that's a committee that's committed to bipartisan. I give a lot of credit to my ranking member. In essence, I had 2 ranking members. I had Representative Chandler from Yakima and Representative Dent from Moses Lake. And they both did a great job in working together as a caucus. And I know some of you, I think I saw some of your names signed into some of the committee hearings. I don't know about how Steve felt, but it was a challenge to run a committee hearing, excuse me, because it was so difficult to kind of understand and get the impact from the committee members, and it was difficult to have questions and work through that process. But I think we did okay. And, if we're remote for another foreseeable future, we kind of learned our way, but ultimately missing the ability, I just equate it with, there were some moments where I wish as I left the committee hearing, I could have walked over to the ranking member or walked over to Representative Dent or another member of the other caucus and kind of put my hand on their shoulder and just say, hey, we can figure this out. The problem with remote is when your time was up, the screen just went blank. So sometimes we were right in the middle of discussing something and maybe there were some differences of opinions and you just kind of miss that ability just to kind of walk like you can do in person and just walk up to them and say, hey, don't worry about it. We got this. We'll figure it out. Let's talk some more. And I think in that to me was the biggest piece missing in all of this, was just the ability to kind of look someone in the eye and say, look, we're not that far apart. But when a screen just goes blank in the middle of a debate, it kind of left a little bit more, it was a little difficult. So with that, let's get to questions.
Yeah, and maybe if I could, Colleen, I just wanted to highlight, I know there was a lot of discussion around public health and reorganizing the public health structure with local public health boards. And the policy bill got considerably limited as the legislative process went on, but we were able to provide the funding. So there's the operating budget has about $150 million to beef up our public health system. There is some policy in the budget to drive to some regionalization just because of the efficiencies, right? There's some efficiencies behind sharing epidemiologists and sharing some skills within a region. And Clallam has done that, you know, since Mike and I were commissioners, we did that. We would sort of share staff. Dr. Locke would be shared between Jefferson County and Clallam County, for example. So the funding's there, which I think is important, but there is also language to start to look at, see where there might be inefficiencies without, you know, usurping any of the local boards of health's power and that local input, which is so important for public health. So with that, I think we're open for questions.
Okay, terrific. So I have one. So it's twofold. With the Climate Commitment Act that passed and that it goes into effect, I understand 2023, if there's a 5-cent gas tax that's also passed, how will Clallam County be able to take advantage of the clean energy jobs that are to be created through that process? And then also, how will that affect forestry through carbon sequestrations mechanisms that are proposed in that legislation?
Yeah, you want to take that, Mike? You want me to take that? Maybe we'll both. So in Grays Harbor, the clean fuel standard is really going to help Renewable Energy Group, which is, you know, they have a distillery, basically a fracking facility down there, and they're creating biofuels. So they'll be able to sell that into the Washington market, which will be a huge deal. They're already planning to expand. So I don't see any facility like that happening on the North Peninsula, although they are hoping to be able to use wood waste. So that's another, you know, value added for some of the fiber that's coming off our timber landscape. The cap and trade, there'll be investments that will be able to be made from that revenue. The pulp and paper and the timber industries I was actually able to get an amendment in appropriations that clarified their obligations there. So it's a lot less onerous than when it came out of the Environment Committee. And this relates to businesses that have global impact, right? They're in a very competitive global market. They're energy intensive and emissions intensive. And so the dates of their compliance has been put out, and then they're extended out. And then there's just not the technology. Actually, they've made some great investments, and they've really cut down on their impacts for global warming, and greenhouse gases. But they still need to develop the technology. So we extended out the timelines for them. So the sequestration piece is, I'll just say, is less than clear. There is some advantage, right? Because there are credits to be gained there. But to be honest, I don't know if there's as much upside as I thought there was about 2 or 3 years ago. But I think there's still an upside. But these are sophisticated markets that need to be developed, right? And so there is an upside. It's maybe not as robust as I thought it was originally, but we'll see. I mean, this is obviously climate change and greenhouse gas impacts have been a long-term problem. So it's going to take a while for us to adjust to, to those, to these markets as they develop.
Okay, thank you. Representative Chapman, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah. I'll just add about, excuse me, Renewable Energy Group, which makes low carbon fuel in Grays Harbor. There's a lot of conversation. There's just been a lot of misinformation that this is going to add 26 cents, 30 cents a gallon. Let me just quote from the vice president of REG. And for those that don't know, I mean, REG is a NASDAQ traded worldwide company that sells their product on the open market. They're based in Ames, Iowa, which last time I checked probably isn't a hotbed of progressive environmental thought. And as he said, if my product added 25 cents a gallon, I'd be run out of Ames. So if oil's around $60 a barrel like it is now, it's about par with diesel, the product that they make. when oil's cheap, if oil drops down to $35, $40 a barrel, there'll be a few cents increase. And if oil were to rise, then actually at some point biodiesel is cheaper. What we do know is that Washington did not have a low carbon fuel standard. And these jobs this product is being made right here in the 24th legislative district. With a standard, they're going to increase production in Grays Harbor, and they're going to look at siting another plant in Washington state in a rural area. So when we talk about rural jobs, I mean, these are real jobs. And this is a product that is traded worldwide. And this is a viable company that's publicly traded. If you look at their stock price, it's gone nothing but straight up since a year ago. So I'm pretty positive, and I think that this is going to help our carbon footprint, but it's definitely going to help our rural jobs. The other thing is, if any of you have talked with Bill Herman, this is the aviation jet fuel out of forest material is a legitimate product, and there's a company looking at a multi-billion-dollar investment in Grays Harbor because of the access to timber material on the North Olympic Peninsula. In partnership with Delta Airlines, Alaska Airlines has already flown cross-continental flights with aviation jet fuel made from forest material. So people can say this is just, Green New Deal, it's all not going to do anything. Well, the men and women that work at REG, former military, $80,000 a year jobs, they're pretty excited about the future of alternative fuels. So time will tell. And if I'm wrong, time will tell. But I think that this is the future for an area like ours. We can be on the cutting edge.
So I've been talking to several legislators about it once they said it was passing. And, and the promise of green jobs is great. I know Grays Harbor needs more jobs, but so does Clallam County. And we're going to be, and it's important that we're responsible and environmental stewards, but I just hope Clallam County will receive some of the benefit of the green jobs too. So I'm going to be trying to figure out how we can potentially make that happen. And I'd love to partner with you on that, along with everyone else that I know cares about the economy of Clallam. So
one last thing, one of the things we were able to do through an amendment that I worked on, and it was a bipartisan amendment, was to require the state to come up with some look at the permitting processes, because that's one of the complaints is that, well, you'll never be able to site one of these factories in Washington state. The Senate also put in language that ramping up that a certain amount of low carbon fuel will have to be manufactured in Washington state. Well, we know it's not going to be manufactured in the I-5 corridor. So permitting, rural jobs, where that, and could Clallam be in that mix? Sure, if the port's got land, if they've got the ability, if they want to take a look at and there's research and development, much like the carbon fiber facility, that I think there's companies that want to come here to do more research and development. And I can see Clallam County being a key part of that. So but the permitting is the issue, and we're going to have to look at that. And we put that in the bill.
So Forks has 155 acres that is industrially zoned, heavy industrially zoned right next to their industrial park. And so I think we ought to be aggressively looking at how can we take advantage of some of these opportunities using that as a resource, because they obviously want those jobs, and it's not, in an area surrounded by residential. So with that, Jim McIntyre, you had a question.
Yeah, probably for Mike, but for any of the legislative delegation. We all know about the situation at the Elwha Bridge that as it crosses over the Elwha River. If you know that WashDOT has released a timeline for that reconstruction, can we know it here just so that we're aware of what the prospective schedule looks like? And if WashDOT doesn't have a timeline for that, maybe you could encourage them to create one and get it out on the net.
Yeah, I don't think they do have one complete. It's still funded in the we were able to maintain that funding of COVID, and then that project's also working through a federal appropriation because there's some national park land. That's a great question, and I will see if we can't get some more information on that project. Last I had heard was they were hoping to go out for bid by this fall.
Okay, thank you. Just to make sure you all know, I put in, or actually Peggy put in the chat, we went through the capital budget and looked for projects that were in Clallam or Jefferson counties. I had told Brian I'd look for Jefferson while I was at it. Brian's my counterpart at the EDC in Jefferson County. And so that list is there if anybody wants to pull that down. The original list that I put out showed a Forks Creek hatchery, but is it for $6 million? As it turns out, the folks in Forks pointed out that that's not anywhere near our county. So anyway, our county got about $30 million worth of funding. I could have, of course, missed some, but and all the projects are on there, which Shipley Center got some funding, and the Field Arts and Events Hall, Shore Aquatic Center, Boys and Girls Club, there's a long list, the Joint Operations Center, Emergency Operations Center. And so Clallam got 30, and because of the Port Hadlock sewer, they got about 40. So the next question I saw on the list was Kai.
Thank you. My question relates to the disparate impact on a county like ours of higher fuel costs. I mean, we're geographically remote. We're also very large. It takes a long time to drive from Forks to Sequim. And we also are economically disadvantaged. So higher transportation fuel costs would disparately impact us compared to, for example, King County. And I was wondering, Mike and Steve, what you can tell us, what we should expect a couple of years out from legislation passed this year, how much gasoline should rise just due to taxes and other regulatory requirements, and whether there are any offsets in the legislation that would help a county such as ours bear that increased burden that I guess is for the common good, to the extent that the concern about climate change drives much of this.
Yeah, I mean, Kai, I think you're right. There will be increases. I think the increase, though, is probably de minimis compared to the fluctuation in the market right now. Because as you noticed, probably at the pump, gas prices have gone up probably 50, 60 cents since the first of the year. And I think these impacts from the clean fuel standard and cap and trade will probably be within the 10 to 15 cent range. So no question there is impacts, but I'd say they're probably well within the market variations that already exist. But I don't think there's any offsets, particular offsets. You know, as the dollars are generated from cap and trade, they will be distributed, you know, across the state. And a fair amount of that has to go to reducing carbon, because I think that's what all of us are trying to do. And a lot of that is in the transportation sector. I mean, it is interesting as we move in the capital budget, for example, in the clean energy category, we have a fair amount of money. I think it's like $15, $20 million for grid modernization. As we move to electric vehicles, and as you know, most of the major manufacturers are starting to move that way, there'll be huge impacts. Well, just think about it. There's no fluids in an electric car, right? So all the stormwater and hydrocarbon pollution that comes off our vehicles will be diminished. So that's a huge upside for the quality of our water and the quality of the Salish Sea. But we need to have a grid and the technology to be able to support that transition. And as folks may know, within the transportation budget under Amendment 18, any gas tax has to go to roads and ferries, right? It goes to the network itself. That does not provide dollars for mass transit, multimodal, or for electrification. The cap and trade program will help backfill some of that. So they're linked in that way. And I think that we would see some of that money to help us, provide charging stations and adopting our grid to be able to support that electrification.
Great, thank you.
Just real quick, I guess I'm just I'm gonna bet my future that in 5 years there will be no impact and probably gas will be much cheaper just because of the declining use of a product that is waning worldwide. The price of oil is on a long-term downward trajectory, and these programs are not. We're really arguing over something as the world is changing faster than we are in policy land. And every car manufacturer is now saying they're going to be fully electrified, not that far away. Some are 2030 and some are by 2040. So electrification of our transportation system is going to happen. We actually moved some policy forward. But I'm going to bet in 5 years, gas prices are cheaper than they are today. And I would bet a substantial sum of money. I mean, I would put a $50,000 bet on that tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Representative Chapman.
I'm going to run that brokerage. I'm going to run that bet.
What's gas today? Let's write this down.
I would go short oil futures, and you're going to make a killing over the next 5 years.
Okay, Donna Harrison, owner of Harrison Shoe Store in Sequim, has a question. Go ahead, Donna.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to bring us back to a current concern. We have a manager that's been with us for 3 years. She's absolutely marvelous. She actually has a degree in environmental biology, and she was wonderful for our store. Unfortunately, under the current conditions, the owner of her rental house decided to sell, and the house sold quickly at an exorbitant price. The owners came in and were rather radical, so she was forced to move, even under COVID restrictions and everything. She was unable to find a rental, and I'm sure most of you are quite aware of the housing market or lack thereof for sale or for rentals in the area. She gave us ample notice. We did everything we could to help her find a rental. She was unable to find anything at all. She's now leaving our business and the county May 15th. We've lost an absolutely outstanding employee because of the housing market. The other part of the problem is the incentives with the unemployment in the extended benefits. It's difficult to find employees who want to come in. We pay quite well. We're a small business, so we're unable to offer great benefits, like the larger box stores, but we do pay well. We were forced to go on PTO. We offer better than PTO. We offered better than PTO before the government forced us into PTO. So we have a problem with the unemployment market that's currently going on. I think we're a little bit better off than the service industry. Many of our neighbor businesses in the service industry aren't able to open up fully, like indoor dining or outdoor dining, because they can't get employees because they can make more money on unemployment. So those are the current issues. So we're currently looking for a full-time manager. Our hours are great, Tuesday through Friday, 9:30 to 5, Saturday, 9:30 to 4. We're wonderful employers. We have super customers. Our business is finally starting to come back up after the shutdown and the economy. But we're quite concerned about the housing market, the ability for Clallam County to incentivize more people in our county for good jobs, with the economy that we have, and get our people back to work. So I'm really interested in what can be done about that. And on top of that, we had a 0 unemployment insurance rating, and now we're helping to pay for the fraud that occurred with a 2.52% unemployment benefit rating.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So let's start at maybe at the end. So you're not paying for the fraud. Actually, the operating budget backfilled all that. So that's not, your rates are not related to that. In fact, there's quite a bit of money in the operating budget to diminish your rates. So you should not be seeing those 15 to 20% increases that were talked about in January. So
I thought $80 million. I thought $80 million was, it wasn't. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
No, yeah, there's a lot of myth out there, but that's been addressed. So, and on the housing is a huge issue across the state. You know, there is a moratorium so that landlords can't kick people out, and that based on the virus, but you know, that doesn't prevent someone from selling, of course, as your manager experienced. Again, this is, I think, a pretty good crosswalk between the capital budget and the operating budget. We've got $90 million, almost $100 million, I think, excuse me, in the capital budget for what we call rapid response. And so if there are properties or land that's available, we can go in and purchase that and turn it into a housing facility. That's more, I think, in the urban areas, probably in the I-5 corridor, less so in our area. But we also had money. We created a new fund called Connections, right? Infrastructure Connections, that's got about, I think, $60 million in it to help fund the sewer and water and the land purchases. And part of this is stimulus money coming out of DC to be able to create more opportunity for developers to come in and build the multifamily housing. Port Townsend actually has I think they're getting about 1.2 million to purchase land and put in sewer, water, and streets. And then the developer will come in and generate, in one parcel, I think will be about 30 units, and another parcel could be as many as 40 units. So we're trying to be innovative around the housing piece to provide funding for infrastructure and connections, because a lot of the Housing Trust Fund and other housing dollars they build the units, but they don't provide the infrastructure. And those that have been working on this, like Randy and Mark, know that that's been a challenge, right? Is getting that sewer and water and sidewalks and meeting some of those. So that's a new innovative fund within the capital budget to help address that issue. And it's an interesting, it's not really a partisan issue, and it's not a rural urban issue. I mean, there's obviously real challenges in the I-5 corridor, but there's challenges across the state on affordable housing. So, you know, there's rental assistance in the operating budget. There is, you know, dollars for permanent supportive housing. So we build it, right? But you got to have the services to be able to maintain those facilities. So it's an ongoing challenge driven by, you know, a lot of supply and demand and quite frankly, inequities in the economy that have driven housing prices just through the roof. So there's not one solution to a very complex problem, but I think with the dollars that actually came out of DC with the stimulus, we've been able to meld the operating needs, the servicing needs, and the capital needs to try to address this, you know, moving forward.
Great, thank you. I'm going to put in the chat information about a housing summit that Clallam County's United Way, Christy Smith, has been putting together in partnership with a lot of different nonprofits that are experts in housing, such as Habitat for Humanity. And for $30, you can get one of these seats. They're normally a lot more than that, but it's experts nationwide housing summit. And hopefully they've still got some more seats available, but it's May 12th and 13th. And if you want more information, you can contact Christy Smith about that, and I'll put it in the chat there. Yeah, I know it's a big issue, and I hope our counties and cities can take that up in a more concerted way to figure out what some solutions are, because it's not getting better. And with people finding realizing that they don't have to live in a congested area to do the work that they normally do. They are definitely finding SQUIM in Port Angeles, and it's just driving up the costs, especially when the VRBOs and Airbnbs have taken up a lot of the normal rental market supply that was previously out there. So I'm gonna put that link in the chat, and a big thank you to the partners there that have been working on that, getting information about that housing summit out there. Commissioner Ozias and Commissioner Johnson, I know you both have been really involved with the housing issues. Is there anything you want to share around that?
Sure. Just very briefly, we're working on a variety of fronts to address what is our community's greatest challenge. We believe that we've got a unique opportunity right now to make some progress, and we are keen to understand how we can best leverage our 1406 Revenue Relief Act dollars, the other existing revenue streams, potentially the Opportunity Fund, and work with the private industry partners that we need to have as partners at the table. So we're looking at a couple of different vehicles to help provide some flexibility. We're looking potentially at creating a community land trust model or a land bank. I don't know exactly where that's going to end up, but the idea is that we want to bring every resource to bear and get something done now, and understand how important partnership with private industry is to do that.
Randy?
Yeah, similar to what Mark said, obviously there's not one answer to solve this solution. It's going to take all of us working together. What I appreciate from what Steve said, and I've come across it certainly with some of the builders, the whole infrastructure issue, whether it be a lack of sewer capacity in SQUIM, or we don't have streets paved, and other issues in Port Angeles, I think that's a component part of what's going to certainly be necessary to get builders to move forward. Certainly the infrastructure issue, because it's very expensive, and obviously it's an additional cost that the cities have. So that's just certainly one of the things we're doing. And similar to what Mark said, we've been working obviously with Peninsula Housing, Habitat, and others to look at maybe, let's think outside the box. How can we actually accomplish some things more quickly than not? So again, it's work in progress. We're getting there, but not as quickly as we'd like. And it's an issue all across the board throughout the county, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. I hope ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and the code around that can be looked at as well. From everything I've read, there's so much opportunity in what other communities across the U.S. are doing to use that as a resource to help solve this problem. And of course, also multifamily. And the city of Port Angeles has the multifamily tax exemption throughout their city limits, which is a huge benefit to developers that are looking to for a location. They always are interested on the return on investment, of course. And one thing that developers have told me over and over again when they pass on our communities is that they also consider what the median wage is doing. And in our county, they're not seeing increases. So they choose another county all too often. But we can work on that. And we're certainly, a lot of exciting news happening just with the Dash Air Service. Their announcement just came out. John, do you want to share about that on a positive note? And then we'll call it a morning. And just again, want to thank everybody for attending this today. I think it was really a valuable discussion, and I'm sure we'll have ongoing discussions in this arena. John?
Absolutely. Very happy to share that Port spent the better part of the last year working with a new regional airline, and they made their press release yesterday announcing by third quarter, probably I'm hoping 1st of September is the goal right now. They're going to start up 4 flights a day directly into SeaTac. They're hoping to maybe even make that 5 flights a day during like Thursday through Sunday during kind of some of the peak days. But they have a very solid business plan. They're going to be flying a 9-seat twin-engine plane, very cost-effective. They're looking at some intro fares in the $69 range. Probably going to average more like 99 over time, or maybe a little bit more. But they're a very solid company. A lot of executives from Horizon Air and Alaska Airlines that have started up this company, and we are very excited to have airfare back in Port Angeles after a 6.5-year absence. So aiming for September 1st right now.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, we're hoping you'll be able to go to Kayak or Expedia and plug in CLM to whatever the destination is. That won't happen right away, and so that first year is going to be really critical to ensure that they are successful, and then they'll be able to do some code share partnerships with entities like Alaska Airlines. So if you're thinking between driving and flying, the port will offer, I believe, free parking. And so that will be a big offset in cost, which should drive people to consider taking the flights. And like John said, there'll be high frequency. So we're trying to match up so that there'll be easy connections and just make it a better quality of life for all of Clallam County. So if we are way past our time, and I really appreciate our representatives from the 24th District joining us, and I hope you have a great day. It looks pretty sunny out, and we'll see you next week. We're going to have Commissioner Hillary Franz on with us, and so we can talk about what DNR can do and is doing to try to help improve our economy and find jobs for underemployed and unemployed, and see what's an option there for us. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we're going to call it a day. Bye.
Colleen, I'm sorry, what was the name of the new regional airline?